The biting October wind swept across the Colorado mountains, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and the promise of a harsh winter. Marcus Sullivan stared through the fogged window of his isolated cabin, his gray eyes lost in the rocky vastness that stretched beyond his property. At 42 years old, the ex-Marine sergeant carried more than just the extra pounds gained since leaving active duty. The scars from Afghanistan weren't just physical. One that cut across his left jaw, AE, reminder of an IED in Helmand, but also mental, invisible to others' eyes, yet devastating as a minefield in his own mind. 3 months had passed since his uncle Edgar's funeral. The eccentric miner who had left him as inheritance a 50-acre property lost in the Rocky Mountains, and a cave that, according to legal documents, presents no significant commercial or mineralogical value. Marcus laughed bitterly. Even in death, Edgar managed to be ironic. The property was mortgaged. Back taxes accumulated like a silent avalanche, and his bank account was shrinking faster than snow in the sun. Outside, a familiar deep bark echoed among the rocks. Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, emerged from the tree line with his black and tan coat gleaming under the filtered light of the clouds. The dog had been his companion since his military service days, trained to detect explosives and save lives. Now, in the oppressive silence of the mountains, Rex seemed to be his only connection to a world that still made sense. Marcus opened the cabin door, and the cold air invaded his lungs like a refreshing slap. Rex approached, his erect ears catching every sound from the surrounding forest, his amber eyes always alert. He was an extraordinary animal. During 3 tours in Afghanistan, Rex had located more than 40 explosive devices, saving hundreds of lives. His intelligence went beyond military training. There was an almost human understanding in his gaze, an ability to read emotions and situations that often surprised Marcus. "What's up, boy?" Marcus petted the dog's head, feeling the familiar texture of his dense fur. "Find anything interesting out there in the forest?" Rex tilted his head, as if understanding the question perfectly, then walked toward the phone that was ringing persistently inside the cabin. Marcus sighed. In recent days, the calls had become predictable torture: bank, credit card, law office. He answered reluctantly. "Marcus Sullivan." The voice on the other end was oily, loaded with artificial cordiality that immediately triggered his combat instincts. "Mr. Sullivan, good morning. This is Theodore Blackwood from Blackwood Development Corporation. I have a proposal that will certainly spark your interest." Marcus knew the name. Blackwood was a real estate development magnate who had transformed several small Colorado towns into luxury resorts, displacing local residents in the process. His reputation was built on aggressive negotiation tactics and a network of political contacts that allowed him to circumvent environmental regulation. "I'm not interested in selling," Marcus said dryly. "Ah, but you haven't heard my offer yet." Blackwood's laughter sounded like the grinding of rusted metal. "I'm prepared to offer $300,000 for your property. Cash, immediate payment. I imagine that with your current financial difficulties, this would be quite an attractive solution." The mention of his financial difficulties made Marcus clench his fists. How did Blackwood know about his situation? "Like I said, it's not for sale. Mr. Sullivan, be reasonable. That property has no value whatsoever. It's barren land with a useless cave that not even experienced miners could explore properly. What exactly do you plan to do there? Raise goats?" Marcus hung up the phone with enough force to make Rex prick up his ears. The dog approached and pressed his muzzle against his leg, a comforting gesture. He had learned during Marcus's most difficult PTSD episodes. It was as if Rex could sense the emotional storm forming in his owner's chest. "Sorry, boy," Marcus murmured, kneeling to look Rex in the eyes. It's complicated, you know?" Rex tilted his head again, then walked to the door and looked at Marcus over his shoulder. It was behavior Marcus recognized. Rex wanted to show him something. During their years of joint service, this specific body language always indicated an important discovery. All right, let's take a walk. Marcus grabbed his worn military jacket and followed Rex outside. The dog didn't take the usual trail that led to the creek, nor did he head to the trees where he usually hunted squirrels. Instead, he went straight to the cave entrance, a rocky opening about 10 feet high that opened like a dark mouth in the mountainside. Marcus had explored the cave briefly a few weeks earlier, just enough to confirm what the legal documents already indicated: an interesting rock formation, but apparently without value. The walls were limestone with some stalactite and stalagmite formations, but nothing that would justify the interest of professional miners. Rex, however, seemed hypnotized by the cave entrance. He stopped about 15 feet from the opening, ears erect, body tense in the position Marcus recognized as maximum alert. It was the same posture the dog assumed in Afghanistan when detecting explosives. "What is it, Rex? What are you sensing there?" The German shepherd walked to the entrance and began sniffing intensely at a specific area of the rocky wall, about 6 feet to the left of the main opening. Marcus approached and examined the region that had caught Rex's attention. At first glance, there was nothing but limestone rock covered with moss and lichen. But when he ran his hand over the surface, he felt something different. There was an almost imperceptible depression in the rock, as if it were an entrance, sealed long ago. Marcus took a flashlight and illuminated the area more carefully. The edges of the depression were too smooth to be natural. Someone had deliberately closed this passage. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to Rex. "Why would someone seal a secondary entrance?" Rex barked once, a deep and deliberate sound that Marcus interpreted as agreement. The dog then headed into the main cave, stopping frequently to wait for Marcus to accompany him. About 150 feet from the entrance, where natural light had completely disappeared, Rex stopped again. Marcus illuminated around with his flashlight and discovered they were in a considerable natural chamber, about 30 feet in diameter, with a ceiling high enough for him to stand comfortably. Rex was standing next to a wall that to Marcus's eyes looked identical to the others, but the dog's behavior indicated something different. "What are you detecting, boy?" Rex began to scratch gently at the wall, behavior he had never demonstrated before. Marcus approached and passed the flashlight over the rocky surface. Then he saw, or rather felt, there was an almost imperceptible air current emanating from a crack in the rock, so thin it was practically invisible. Marcus's heart accelerated. During his military career, he had learned that the most important discoveries often hid in details that others ignored. Rex, with his sharp senses and training to detect anomalies, was clearly identifying something Marcus had missed in his previous exploration. "Are you telling me there's more to this cave than I thought, aren't you?" Rex sat and looked directly at Marcus as if saying, "Finally, you understood." Marcus examined the fissure more carefully. With a knife, he managed to slightly widen the opening, and the air current became more noticeable. There was definitely a larger space on the other side of this wall, but without proper equipment, it would be impossible to investigate more deeply at that moment. They returned to the cabin when the sun began to set, tinting the mountains with golden and purple tones. Marcus prepared dinner, a can of stew for him, and premium food for Rex, but his mind was completely focused on the afternoon's discovery. Why would someone seal cave entrances? And why was Rex, trained to detect explosives, reacting so intensely to these anomalies? That night, Marcus turned on the old computer and began researching the property's history. Official records only went back to the early 20th century, when a miner named Josiah Whitmore had claimed the land in search of gold, but there was no mention of significant discoveries or reasons for abandoning the mining operation. However, a deeper search revealed something intriguing. In 1934, the same year Josiah Whitmore had mysteriously abandoned his operation, there had been a notorious robbery at the Denver National Bank. More than $500,000 in gold and cash had disappeared, along with the 3 robbers. The case was never solved and the treasure was never recovered. Marcus felt a tingle of excitement run down his spine. $500,000 in 1934 would equal millions in today's money. What if the robbers had chosen Colorado's isolated mountains as a hideout? What if Josiah Whitmore wasn't just a miner, but someone with knowledge about the whereabouts of the treasure? Rex, who had been lying beside the fireplace, raised his head and stared fixedly at the window. His ears perked up and a low growl began to vibrate in his throat. Marcus immediately went into maximum alert mode. In 3 years of civilian life, he had never seen Rex display defensive behavior without reason. Marcus turned off the cabin lights and approached the window cautiously. Outside, 2 figures were moving among the trees, clearly trying not to be detected. They carried flashlights, but kept them low, and their movements were too coordinated to be lost. "Tourists!" "Shit," Marcus murmured. Rex positioned himself beside him, his body tense as a compressed spring. Marcus grabbed his hunting rifle and watched the intruders approach the cave entrance. They weren't amateurs. They moved with professional discipline, using hand signals for silent communication. One of them carried what appeared to be portable mining equipment. Then he understood. Blackwood's call hadn't been a random purchase offer. The magnate knew something about the property that Marcus didn't, and now he had sent a team to investigate, or perhaps to remove evidence before Marcus could discover what he really owned. Marcus made a quick decision. Instead of confronting the intruders directly, he decided to follow them and discover exactly what they were looking for. He grabbed his military night vision equipment, a tool he had kept as a memento from his active duty days, and signaled for Rex to remain silent. They left through the back door of the cabin and moved through the forest using infiltration techniques Marcus hadn't employed in years. Rex instantly adapted to stealth mode, his steps silent as a ghost's. They reached an elevated position that offered a clear view of the cave entrance. The 2 men had installed professional lighting equipment and were systematically examining the entrance walls. One of them, a tall man with a military appearance, was studying a document that appeared to be a map or diagram. "Are you sure it's here, Kozlov?" The voice carried an Eastern European accent. "According to the records we got from the law office, yes. Old Edgar Whitmore never revealed the family secret, but the documents we found in his office after the funeral indicate this cave holds more than it appears." Marcus felt his blood freeze. They had investigated his deceased uncle and clearly possessed information he didn't know. Edgar wasn't just his eccentric uncle. He was a direct descendant of Josiah Whitmore, the mysterious miner from the 1930s. The second man, shorter and stockier, pointed to the same wall area that had caught Rex's attention earlier. "This seal looks artificial. Let's open it." They began working with pneumatic tools, creating noise that echoed through the mountains. Marcus realized he needed to act quickly. If they discovered whatever was hidden in the cave, he would lose any advantage he might have. He signaled to Rex, and both began to descend silently down the rocky slope. Marcus's plan was simple. Wait for the men to enter the cave and then block their exit, forcing them to negotiate. It wasn't the most sophisticated plan, but with Rex at his side and superior knowledge of the terrain, it had chances of success. The intruders managed to open a passage in the sealed wall. A stronger air current emerged from the opening, carrying a strange smell, metallic and old, like coins buried for decades. The man called Kozlov illuminated the newly opened passage and smiled with satisfaction. "Bingo! There's a large chamber on the other side, and from the smell," he inhaled deeply, "there's definitely metal in there." They entered the passage one at a time, their flashlights disappearing into the darkness. Marcus waited until he was certain both were completely inside the cave, then moved quickly to the entrance. Rex followed him, his military instincts clearly activated. Marcus positioned some large stones at the entrance of the secret passage, not enough to completely seal it, but enough to make the exit difficult and noisy. Then he positioned himself at the main cave entrance with his rifle, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Excited shouts echoed from the cave's depths, followed by the sound of metal being moved. Whatever the discovery was, it was significant enough to make the men lose their professional composure. 20 minutes later, the noises approached the entrance. The first man emerged from the secret passage, carrying something that gleamed under his flashlight, a genuine gold bar. His face showed a mixture of greed and disbelief. For God's sake, Petrov, there must be tons in there. Coins, bars, jewelry. It's the biggest treasure I've ever seen. That's when Marcus decided to reveal his presence. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, emerging from the shadows with his rifle pointed. "Looks like you found something interesting on my property." Both men froze. Kozlov, the more experienced one, slowly raised his hands, but his eyes calculated distances and angles. Petrov, younger and clearly less experienced, seemed ready to panic. "Mr. Sullivan," Kozlov said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "what a coincidence finding you here." "It's no coincidence at all. You're trespassing on my property and violating a cave that legally belongs to me. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Rex emerged from the shadows beside Marcus, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The German shepherd had positioned himself to block any attempt at lateral escape. A tactical move that demonstrated his instinctive understanding of the situation. Kozlov observed Rex carefully. "I see you're not alone. Beautiful animal. Military training, 3 tours in Afghanistan. He detects explosives, among other things." Marcus kept his voice neutral, but the warning was clear. "Look, we can resolve this like gentlemen," Kozlov continued. "Obviously you didn't know about the treasure, or you would have explored the cave properly already. How about a partnership? We provide expertise and resources for extraction. You provide legal access. We split 50-50. Marcus almost laughed. "And why would I split something that's already mine by right?" "Because," a new voice sounded behind him, "you don't have a choice." Marcus turned quickly, but not quick enough. A third man had approached silently from behind. A tactical error Marcus immediately regretted. This was clearly the operation's leader, better dressed, older, carrying a pistol with a silencer. "Lower the rifle, Mr. Sullivan." Slowly, Marcus quickly assessed his options. He was clearly outnumbered and outpositioned, but Rex was free and clearly awaiting a command. The German shepherd had positioned himself so the 3 men couldn't see him simultaneously, another instinctive tactical move. "You must be the famous Theodore Blackwood," Marcus said, gradually lowering his rifle. "Actually, no. I'm Victor Volkov, and I work for people who make Mr. Blackwood look like a Boy Scout." The Russian accent was evident now. "Blackwood was useful for obtaining information about your financial situation and mapping the property, but this operation goes far beyond real estate development." Marcus understood he had stumbled into something much bigger than he had imagined. "Let me guess, Russian mafia. International criminal organizations prefer the term unconventional business. And you, my veteran friend, just discovered a treasure that can solve many of our cash flow problems." Volkov gestured for Kozlov and Petrov to position themselves to flank Marcus. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign some documents transferring the property to one of our shell companies. In exchange, we'll allow you to keep a small percentage of the treasure, let's say, enough to pay off your debts and disappear quietly. And if I refuse," Volkov smiled coldly, "then you become another tragic statistic. War veteran with financial problems and PTSD commits suicide on isolated. In property. Quite convincing, actually." It was at this moment that Rex demonstrated why he had been one of the most decorated military dogs in his unit. Without any verbal command from Marcus, the German shepherd moved like a silent projectile, leaping directly onto Petrov, the youngest and least experienced man in the group. The impact was devastating. Rex hit Petrov in the chest with enough force to knock him down and immediately proceeded to disarm him using a technique he had been trained to employ against armed insurgents. Petrov screamed when Rex's powerful jaws closed on his wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. Volkov turned to shoot Rex, but Marcus took advantage of the distraction to recover his rifle. In a fluid movement that combined years of military training with survival instinct, Marcus managed to aim his weapon at Volkov before the Russian could react adequately. Kozlov, the most experienced of the group, tried to use the confusion to escape, but Rex had anticipated this possibility. After neutralizing Petrov, the dog immediately moved to block Kozlov's escape route, forcing him to retreat into the cave. "Impressive," Volkov said, keeping his pistol pointed at Marcus, even while looking at the veteran's rifle. "You two really make an efficient team. 3 years saving lives in Afghanistan tend to create that kind of partnership," Marcus replied. "Now lower your weapon. I'm afraid it's not that simple." Volkov smiled again, but this time there was a desperate quality to his expression. "You see, there are very powerful people expecting me to deliver this treasure. People who don't accept failure as an option." Marcus realized they were in a deadly standoff. Both were armed, both had military training, and both knew that any false move would result in death. Rex kept Petrov immobilized, but Kozlov was free and clearly calculating his own options. That's when Marcus heard the sound he had learned to fear during his years in the Middle East. The characteristic tick of an explosive device being activated. "You didn't think we'd come unprepared, did you?" Kozlov shouted from the cave entrance, holding a remote detonator. "We have enough explosives to collapse this entire cave. If we can't have the treasure, nobody can." Marcus felt ice-cold realization run through his veins. They had planned this operation as a scorched earth scenario from the beginning. If they couldn't extract the treasure peacefully, they would destroy everything. To eliminate evidence and witnesses. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice carried uncertainty. "Want to bet your life on it?" Kozlov laughed. "We have 30 seconds before I press this button, enough time for you to make a sensible decision." Rex, still keeping Petrov immobilized, looked at Marcus with an expression the veteran had learned to interpret during years of partnership. The dog had identified something Marcus couldn't see, some detail that could change the situation's outcome. Marcus followed Rex's gaze and noticed something crucial. Kozlov was positioned directly over an unstable rock formation. The vibrations from the pneumatic tools they had used to open the secret passage had weakened the structure. A sufficiently strong impact could cause a localized landslide. It was a desperate chance, but Marcus had learned on the battlefield that desperate chances were often the only viable option. "Rex," he said calmly, using a specific tone of voice the dog recognized as maximum combat command, Avalanche. It was a command they had developed in Afghanistan for situations where it was necessary to destabilize enemy structures. Rex immediately understood, released Petrov, and ran directly to the base of the rock formation where Kozlov was positioned. The German shepherd jumped against the rock with all his strength, creating a vibration that propagated through the already compromised structure. Marcus simultaneously shot at the same area, adding projectile impact to Rex's physical force. The result was spectacular and terrifying. The rock formation began to slide, creating a small localized avalanche that caught Kozlov completely off guard. The detonator flew from his hands when he tried to protect himself from the cascade of stones and debris. Marcus dove to grab the detonator before it could be damaged or accidentally activated. Rex, demonstrating extraordinary reflexes, managed to jump away from the slide zone before being hit. When the dust settled, Kozlov was buried up to his waist in rocky debris, clearly injured but alive. Petrov remained on the ground, holding his injured wrist and moaning. Volkov kept his pistol pointed, but his face showed he had understood the fundamental change in the situation's dynamics. "Looks like the game has changed," Marcus said, holding the detonator while keeping his rifle pointed at Volkov. "You don't know who you're messing with," Volkov said through gritted teeth. "Even if you kill me, here others will come. More dangerous people with less patience? Maybe. But that's a problem for the future. The immediate problem is that you're trapped on my property, injured, and I have control of the explosives you brought." Marcus walked carefully to where he could see inside the secret passage. What he saw left him breathless. The hidden chamber was larger than he had imagined and was literally packed with treasure. Piles of gold bars, chests full of ancient coins, jewels that sparkled under his flashlight. It was a fortune beyond anything he could have imagined, easily enough to solve all his financial problems and still allow him to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But more important than the monetary value was what the treasure represented. A family inheritance that his uncle Edgar had kept secret, probably waiting for the right moment to reveal. An inheritance that international criminal groups were willing to kill to obtain. "Rex," Marcus called. Softly, the German shepherd approached, his coat covered with rock dust but apparently unharmed. "Good job, boy. Once again you saved our lives." Rex wagged his tail once, his discreet version of pride, and positioned himself where he could observe all three men simultaneously. Marcus needed to make quick decisions. He had injured criminals on his property, explosives of unknown origin, and a treasure that would clearly attract more unwanted attention. More importantly, Volkov had made it clear that others would come, more dangerous and less negotiable people. He grabbed Volkov's cell phone and called the county sheriff. It would be a complicated conversation, but Marcus had learned that direct honesty was often the best policy in impossible situations. "Sheriff Morrison, this is Marcus Sullivan from the Whitmore property in the mountains. I need to report a property invasion and, well, it's complicated. You better come here with some deputies. And maybe you should bring someone specialized in explosives too." While awaiting the authorities' arrival, Marcus examined the treasure more carefully. Among the gold bars and ancient coins, he found documents in a waterproof envelope. They were detailed handwritten records by Josiah Whitmore, dated 1934. The story that emerged from the documents was fascinating and disturbing. Josiah hadn't been one of the bank robbers, but rather a miner who had accidentally discovered where the real robbers had hidden the stolen treasure. The three criminals had died in a fight among themselves, leaving only vague maps and clues about the location of their fortune. Josiah had spent months searching, finally locating the treasure hidden in a deep natural chamber of the cave. But instead of reporting the discovery to authorities, he had decided to keep it, apparently planning to use it to secure his family's future. The documents revealed that Josiah had carefully sealed the entrance to the treasure chamber and created an elaborate system of clues and maps that would allow his descendants to recover the fortune when necessary. Edgar, apparently, had never been able to completely decipher his grandfather's system, but Rex had achieved what decades of human searching had not accomplished. His sharp senses had detected the anomalies that indicated hidden passages and concealed chambers. 40 minutes later, 3 sheriff's department cars arrived at the property, followed by an explosives unit van. Sheriff Morrison, a 60-year-old man with a grizzled mustache and experience with unusual mountain situations, listened to Marcus's explanation with increasingly incredulous expression. "Let me see if I got this right," Morrison said, scratching his head. "You discovered a treasure from 1934 on your property, were attacked by Russian criminals with explosives, and your dog helped you defeat them by causing a landslide." "I know how it sounds, Sheriff, but the men are there, the explosives are disarmed, and the treasure, well, you can see for yourself." Morrison examined the cave, accompanied by 2 deputies and the explosives specialist. When they emerged 20 minutes later, his expression had completely changed. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, this is real. There's enough gold in there to buy half the county." The legal process that followed was complex and lengthy, but ultimately favorable to Marcus. As the legal owner of the land, he had rights to the treasure discovered on his property. The FBI took over the investigation of the Russian criminal organization, using information from seized phones and documents to identify a money laundering network operating in multiple states. Volkov, Kozlov, and Petrov were indicted for trespassing. illegal possession of explosives, conspiracy to commit extortion, and a series of other federal charges. During interrogations, it was revealed that Blackwood had been an involuntary informant. His investigation of Marcus's finances had been used by the criminal organization without his knowledge. 3 months after the discovery, Marcus was sitting in his new lawyer's office in Denver, signing the final documents that formalized his legal ownership of the treasure. The total value had been estimated at $4.2 million after taxes and legal fees. "So, what do you plan to do now?" the lawyer asked. Marcus looked out the office window, observing Rex waiting patiently in the parking lot. The German Shepherd had refused to stay home during trips to the city, apparently had decided Marcus needed constant protection. "First, I'm going to pay off all the debts and taxes on the property, then, well, I think I'm going to turn it into a sanctuary for retired military dogs. There are many animals like Rex who serve their country and deserve a quiet place to live their golden years." It was a plan that had gradually crystallized during months of legal proceedings. Marcus had realized that his true wealth wasn't in the gold and jewels, but in the loyalty and intelligence of the companion who had shared both his darkest moments and his greatest triumph. 6 months later, the Whitmore property had been transformed into a 20-acre refuge specifically designed for retired military dogs. Marcus had built first-class veterinary facilities, specialized exercise areas, and comfortable accommodations for both the animals and the veterans who frequently visited them. Rex had become the unofficial senior resident of the sanctuary, using his skills and experience to help other military dogs adapt to civilian life. It was as if the German Shepherd had found a new purpose. Instead of detecting explosives, he now detected when other animals needed emotional support or guidance. On a clear spring afternoon, Marcus was watching Rex interact with a young Belgian Shepherd that had arrived the previous week. The younger dog had lost a leg in an explosion in Iraq and was clearly struggling with anxiety and canine depression. Rex approached the injured animal carefully, using the same patience and intuition he had demonstrated with Marcus during his most difficult PTSD episodes. It was extraordinary to observe, as if Rex could communicate that he understood exactly what the other dog was going through. "Amazing, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind Marcus. He turned and saw Sarah Chen, the veterinarian specialized in animal trauma whom he had hired to direct the sanctuary's medical operations. Sarah was a 40-year-old Asian-American woman, former Navy medical officer, who had left active duty for the same reasons as Marcus: combat fatigue and need for a more positive purpose. "He's always been special," Marcus replied, "but it seems he found his true calling here." "Like you," Sarah observed. "You know, when you first described this project to me, I thought you were just another rich veteran trying to save the world. But this is really something important." Marcus smiled. It was the first time in years he felt genuinely proud of something he had built. "Rex deserves all the credit. If he hadn't detected those anomalies in the cave, you'd still be broke and alone, living in an isolated cabin, avoiding the world," Sarah completed. "It's funny how life works sometimes." Marcus watched Rex gently guide the injured Belgian Shepherd to a sunny area where other dogs were resting. It was an eclectic group: German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labradors, even an English Bulldog, who had served as a detection dog on air bases. They all shared the same story. They had served their country with distinction and now deserved peace and respect. "Dr. Chen," Marcus said eventually, "there's something I never told anyone about that night in the cave." Sarah turned to look at him with curiosity. "When Rex was detecting the anomalies in the cave wall, I had the strangest feeling that he wasn't just using his physical senses. It was like he knew exactly what we were looking for, as if he had some instinctive knowledge about what we would find." Sarah considered this carefully. As a veterinarian with specialization in animal behavior, she had observed many cases of canine intuition that defied scientific explanation. "You know," she said finally, "there are theories about genetic memory in dogs. The idea that information can be transmitted through generations, not just through genes, but through behavioral patterns and instincts. It's possible that Rex inherited some special sensitivity for detecting geological anomalies. Marcus shook his head. Maybe. Or maybe he's just an extraordinary dog who appeared in my life exactly when I needed him most. As if he had heard the conversation, Rex approached and sat beside Marcus. The German shepherd looked directly at his human companion with that expression of deep understanding that Marcus had learned to value above any treasure. "Thank you, boy," Marcus murmured, petting Rex's head, "for everything." Rex wagged his tail once, his characteristic response that meant always partner, and then returned to continue his supervision of the sanctuary's other dogs. Marcus watched his companion walk away and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with financial despair and emotional isolation, but through the loyalty of an exceptional animal and a discovery that defied imagination, he had found not just financial security, but renewed purpose. The gold treasure had solved his material problems, but the real treasure had always been by his side, in the form of a German shepherd whose instincts, intelligence, and unwavering devotion had literally saved his life and given him a reason to keep living. As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, tinting the sky with golden tones that rivaled any treasure found in hidden caves, Marcus Sullivan smiled with genuine contentment for the first time in years. He had discovered that true wealth wasn't in the things you can buy, but in the connections you build, especially that unique and unbreakable connection between a man and his dog, tested on battlefields and forged in moments of absolute necessity. Rex had detected much more than geological anomalies in that cave. He had detected hope, purpose, and the possibility of a future worth living. And that, Marcus understood, was the most valuable treasure of all.